Have you ever felt that shock when someone suddenly claims something you own, like it's theirs with no proof, no reason, and no shame? Imagine walking outside one day, looking at your property, and hearing a stranger confidently declare, "This belongs to the HOA now." That's exactly the nightmare I found myself in when one woman, a self-proclaimed enforcer of the neighborhood, decided that my old storage barn wasn't mine at all. It belonged to the HOA. But here's the twist she didn't see coming. That barn had a history much deeper than anyone realized. It wasn't just a barn. It was once a piece of the railroad. And this single fact would turn the whole story upside down. At first, I didn't think much of it. The barn had always been there. It stood at the edge of my property, weathered and worn but strong, like a forgotten soldier of time. My grandfather used it before me, and before him, it was part of something even bigger. Old tracks once ran across that land, and the barn had been built as a railroad supply shed back in the day. Generations changed, tracks were pulled up, and land was sold, but the barn remained, almost like a monument to history. For me, it was personal. For my family, it was heritage. But for Karen, the woman who thought she ruled our neighborhood, it was suddenly hers. She came storming onto my property one morning, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a badge of authority, and a kind of smirk that told you trouble was on the way. "This barn," she said, tapping her pen against the wooden siding, "is community property. The HOA has decided it belongs to us." I laughed at first. I thought it was some kind of bad joke. I mean, how could anyone just walk up and claim a structure that had been mine for decades? But she wasn't joking. She doubled down, pulling out printed papers filled with highlighted sections and HOA bylaws. She waved them like a sword, demanding I hand over the keys to the barn. That's when I realized this wasn't just a silly misunderstanding. This was war. The thing about people like Karen is that they thrive on intimidation. They count on others giving in, too exhausted or too unsure of their rights to push back. And she had done this before. Neighbors whispered about how she once forced someone to repaint their house 3 times, how she bullied another family into removing their backyard shed, how she threatened fines so often that some people just moved away. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA kingdom. But here's what she didn't know. I had history, records, and the truth on my side. You see, when my grandfather bought the property, he made sure everything was recorded properly. Deeds, maps, land surveys, all of it carefully filed away. And in those documents was proof that the barn was not only on my land, but it had been excluded from any HOA jurisdiction because of its railroad origins. The barn wasn't community property. It wasn't up for debate. But Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about control. Her tactics escalated quickly. Within a week, I started receiving threatening letters in the mail. Bright red stamps across the top screamed, "HOA violation notice." Each letter demanded that I surrender the barn or face massive fines. Some letters even suggested that the barn was unsafe and that the HOA would be forced to demolish it. Imagine opening your mailbox every day and feeling your blood boil, knowing that someone was trying to erase not only your property, but your family's history. But the part that really fueled me wasn't the threats. It was the arrogance. In one letter, she wrote, "As president of the HOA, I have final say over all structures in the neighborhood. Your barn is not an exception." Reading those words, I felt a fire inside me. Who gave her that authority? Who let her believe she could rewrite history with a few lines of ink? So I did what anyone with a stubborn streak and a love for family legacy would do. I started digging deeper. I pulled out old photographs showing the barn standing long before the neighborhood even existed. I found faded blueprints, survey documents, and even letters from the railroad company itself, confirming the shed's origins. Every piece of evidence was like a shield against her false claims. But Karen wasn't done. When intimidation failed, she switched to public shaming. At the next HOA meeting, she stood in front of the crowd, pointed at me, and declared that I was hoarding community property. She painted a picture of me as selfish, refusing to share something that didn't belong to me in the first place. Some neighbors frowned at me. Others whispered behind their hands. But I stood tall. I didn't interrupt. I didn't fight back with words. I knew my time would come. And it did. When she finished her speech, I walked up with a thick folder in my hands. Calmly, I laid out every piece of evidence on the table for everyone to see. I explained the railroad connection, the land survey, and the fact that the barn had never been part of the HOA's authority. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face turned red. For the first time, she had no quick comeback. But here's the thing. People like Karen don't back down easily. She wasn't going to just admit she was wrong and walk away. No, she doubled down again, claiming my documents were forged and outdated. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end at a meeting. This was heading towards something bigger, something legal, and honestly, that's what made the story even more fascinating. Because as I prepared to defend my barn in court, I realized this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about power, about control, about standing up to someone who thought she could rewrite the rules of life. It became a battle of principle. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because this isn't just my fight. It's a story that reflects something many people face. Bullies hiding behind authority, trying to take what isn't theirs. It's about knowing your rights, valuing your history, and never letting intimidation steal your voice. So if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or faced someone who thought they could push you around, remember this. Truth, history, and courage are stronger than any clipboard, any bylaw, or any fake authority. And this was only the beginning. What came next turned into a battle that shocked the entire neighborhood. Karen wasn't ready to give up, and the HOA wasn't ready to lose face. But I was ready to fight, and the railroad's forgotten history was about to play its strongest card yet. Backhand index pointing right. If you're hooked by what you've heard so far, stick around to the next part, because Section 2 will take this battle to a whole new level. The showdown is just beginning. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share with anyone who's ever had to deal with a Karen in their life. Because trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Have you ever noticed that when someone like Karen loses round one, they don't retreat quietly? No, they reload. They come back sharper, louder, and more determined to make your life miserable. That's exactly what happened after I exposed the truth at the HOA meeting. For a moment, I thought I had won. I thought logic, history, and evidence would silence her once and for all. But if Section 1 of the story was about intimidation, Section 2 is about escalation. Karen wasn't finished, not even close. The very next week, I received a certified letter. Inside was a notice that the HOA had filed a community property claim against me. Basically, they were trying to argue in legal terms that the barn was theirs, no matter what history said. They wanted to drag me into court. And the kicker? The notice threatened daily fines until the matter was resolved. I sat at my kitchen table holding that paper, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with anger. Imagine being told that something your family cared for, something tied to your very roots, was suddenly up for grabs just because a neighbor decided it should be. That's when I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about standing up to a system of intimidation that had gone unchecked for too long. I hired a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in property and land rights. The first thing he told me was this: HOAs can be powerful, but they can't override history and deed records. You have a strong case. What they're trying to do is harassment. Those words gave me the courage I needed. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to Karen's moves. I was preparing to strike back. Court day came faster than I expected. Picture this: a small courtroom filled with neighbors who came to watch the drama unfold. HOA board members sitting stiffly in their suits, and Karen at the front with that same smirk she always wore when she thought she was winning. She strutted like she owned the place, waving stacks of papers at her attorney. But I noticed something. Her papers looked shiny and new, freshly printed, while mine were weathered with age, old maps, deeds, letters that told a story no fresh ink could erase. When it was her turn, Karen's lawyer argued that the barn was abandoned railroad property and therefore, by default, should belong to the HOA as community land. He spoke smoothly, confidently, as if it were all common sense. Some people in the gallery even nodded along. And then it was my turn. My lawyer stood up, laid the original deed on the judge's bench, and explained how my grandfather had purchased the land, including the barn, fair and square, decades before the HOA even existed. He pointed to the railroad company's old letter that stated the shed had been officially sold as private property when the tracks were dismantled. He explained how the HOA had no jurisdiction over that part of my lot because it had never been written into the association's covenants. Every word he spoke was a hammer striking down Karen's argument. Then came the moment that changed everything. My lawyer pulled out a photograph, black and white, faded with age. It showed the barn standing tall, with railroad tracks running right beside it. In the picture, you could see workers in their overalls, leaning against a shed during a break. It was undeniable proof that this barn wasn't some random structure. It was history. The judge studied the photo for a long moment. The courtroom fell silent. For the first time, Karen looked nervous. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only did the HOA have no claim to the barn, but their repeated harassment and false violation notices were deemed an abuse of power. Karen's face turned crimson as the judge ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees. It was more than a victory. It was justice. But the story didn't end there. After the ruling, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Some people were angry at Karen for dragging the community into such a mess. Others finally felt brave enough to share their own stories, how they had been bullied, fined, or threatened into submission. My fight had opened a door. People began to see that they didn't have to bow down to her intimidation anymore. The barn itself became almost legendary. Neighbors started asking to see it, curious about its railroad past. Kids came by, wide-eyed, listening to me tell stories of trains that once rumbled through the land. What Karen had tried to erase became a source of pride for the community. Instead of being a violation, the barn became a piece of shared history, a reminder of resilience. And as for Karen, let's just say her power began to crumble. At the next HOA election, her position as president was challenged for the first time in years. People had seen her abuse of power, and they weren't willing to give her another chance. She lost the vote. The woman who once ruled with fear was now just another neighbor, one whose clipboard no longer held any authority. Looking back, I realized this fight was never just about a barn. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. It was about preserving history and refusing to let arrogance erase truth. And most importantly, it was about showing others that no one, not even the loudest Karen, has the right to take what doesn't belong to them. So what's the lesson here? It's simple. Know your rights, protect your legacy, and never let intimidation silence you. Because sometimes the things we fight for are more than wooden nails. They're pieces of our story, chapters of our family, echoes of history that deserve to be remembered. And if you ever find yourself facing someone like Karen, someone who believes power gives them a right to rewrite reality, remember this story. Stand tall, hold your ground, and let the truth speak louder than their arrogance. Backhand index pointing right if this story inspired you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs the courage to fight back. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever had to deal with a Karen in your life? I'd love to hear your story, because together we prove that truth always wins.